Marhaba, and welcome to the Matrix Green Pill, where real people connect.
Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. My name is Hilmarie Hutchison, and today I'm joined by our lovely producer, Shireen. Welcome, Shireen.
Hi, Hilmarie. I'm so excited. Well, I think we're both excited to introduce our guest today, Taryam Al Subaihi. So Taryam began his career as a journalist. He worked as a writer and a columnist for some of the UAE's top English language newspapers, including Gulf News, Emirates Today, Arabian Business, and The National. He is now the MEPRA chair and the director of corporate communications at EWEC. Taryam, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is indeed excellent to have you with us today. Before we start, Taryam, could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell our audience about your background and life in the UAE?
I was raised partially in the United States and the UK. My father was doing his master's at Ph.D. at the time. So I returned to the UAE in my teenage years. I was educated, well, both in Canada and in the UAE, in the American University of Sharjah, where I studied multimedia and design, followed by print journalism. And then, as you guys mentioned, I began my career as a print journalist for the UAE local English newspapers. In fact, I was very fortunate enough to be the first UAE national to write for daily English newspapers in the UAE. From there, I was also fortunate to given the opportunity to work as an international correspondent for the newspapers. Again, the first time a UAE national had taken on that role. Following that, I moved into the field of corporate communications, starting off in Dubai with the Majid Al Futtaim Group, and then moved on to Abu Dhabi with numerous organizations, including Etihad Airways, and now with EWEC.
Well, you've had some amazing experiences.
Yes, and luckily for me, along the way, I still managed to stay true to my nature as a journalist, and I continued to write columns all the way up until I think it was 2016 for various publications, but mostly for the national newspaper in the UAE. So yeah, I was lucky to have the best of both worlds.
So you're really passionate about writing.
Yes, I come from, it goes as far back as the 18th century. My great, I don't know how many greats, grandfather was the royal writer and poet for the King of Egypt.
Oh, wow.
And it was funny enough, it was just last year that I was able to trace a book that he wrote through an Egyptian researcher who was studying poets during that period of time. And it was very entertaining. It was actually quite humorous. It was a book of poems that addressed many political issues, but in a humorous way and through poetry. So our journey, I guess, began there. And then more recently, my father was also a journalist for over 30 years in the UAE, writing in the Arabic language and an international foreign correspondent. So you could say, it's part of the family.
Yeah, writing is in your blood. There's no doubt. And to be able to trace your genealogy that far back, that is impressive. I don't think there's many people that can say they can trace their family roots that far back. It's amazing.
Yeah, we're very lucky to come across. That was just one example we found. And then the entire family was delighted to read it. It gives us a good history of where we came from.
This is indeed very interesting, but let's dive more into your roles. So as I had mentioned in the introduction, you are the director of corporate communications at EWEC and also the MEPRA chair. On top of that, I believe you are also currently pursuing your Ph.D. at Lancaster University in the UK. How are you managing your time with all these roles and responsibilities?
It's quite challenging for sure. But like we discussed, it's something that's part of my family. It's something that I'm passionate about. Communications on the corporate side uses the same tools, skills, and expertise that you would use in newspapers or as chair of MEPRA. So the ease it comes is that what I do in one position is easily transferred to the other. In fact, I benefit from my experience in each as I switch hats. MEPRA for me is something that's always been close to the heart. I have been following its progress over the years, and I had always, in fact, in MEPRA majlises or workshops, I can't remember which one it was, but I had raised the question more than once. When did the community or the public feel that MEPRA is ready to be led by UAE National? And I guess the answer was this year. Taking on the MEPRA chair role was something that I always hoped for, not for myself, but for UAE international to bring in that knowledge, culture, and experience to what is already developed into an excellent initiative that has progressed wonderfully over 20 years. I took it on with great pride, and I do it with passion, and I look forward to everything I do with MEPRA. In terms of my PhD, again, it's in communication, so it's all related, and everything I do within EWEC or within MEPRA in itself is something I use in my own study. So it's a perfect balance.
Well, it sure sounds like a lot. And I mean, of course, it's very impressive to be studying for your PhD, which alone is such a huge responsibility. And I'm sure that, do you have any free time around with all the responsibilities to do things that you enjoy?
I do find free time. I enjoy spending my time with the family. And so our environment is organized in a way where we have, my mother, the kid's grandmother living close by, my brother's living close by. And so when there's free time, it's within the neighborhood. So it's easy calling the kids over and taking a walk over to one of our family members and spending time there. And, in this digital age, if required, it's easy to multitask. The phone is there. If some work needs to be done, it can be done. So, yeah, I don't feel that I'm losing any valuable free time. I guess it just makes you enjoy it even more.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's talk more about how the PR and communications landscape has evolved within the region of what you've seen.
So when I began, even when I was in the universities in the 90s, I was working part-time for an agency as a writer and photographer. And so I was introduced to it even when I was at that level of studying. And I have seen great changes. What was a misunderstood industry or a profession that was seen a sort of addition or a luxury to a company who can afford something extra has now moved on to rising right at the top, being part of all decision-making levels in companies across the UAE. And so throughout the journey, I have always hoped for progress to be achieved, hence my connection with MEPRA and my passion for MEPRA, as I always saw MEPRA as the solution to this obstacle that was present at the time of just a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness of just not only what PR professionals do, but what PR professionals and agencies or communication agencies, let's say, can bring value and what type of value they can bring companies, be it financial, be it through culture, be it through externally or internally. And so I'm delighted of how far we've come. Is there more room to grow? Absolutely. There are many areas that I've identified where I'm hoping we can, as a community and as an industry within the UAE, work together towards improving. And one of them, I started writing about topics that would build the bridge between the expatriate and the UAE national community. I feel that our industry has done great in terms of the awareness angle that we were talking about. However, I feel there is still very much more to do with the Arabic communications. And I feel it's part of our industry that we've not tapped into. And there is so much knowledge, being one who's living on the fence and has always seen both sides. Even in newspapers, there is a physical split between the Arabic writers and communicators or communication professionals, including photographers, designers, and editors, and the English. And it was only very few of us who would walk over or between both sides. And it made us a much better journalist because of it, because we had access to two different worlds that weren't connected. And so at a newspaper level, it is at a company level, and within the communications, it's that distance still needs to become shortened. More bridges need to be built. For this reason that for the first time next year, we're launching the Arabic Communications Awards, similar to the MEPRA Awards that happens in December, to celebrate the talent, the experience, the knowledge, and the Arabic communications profession as a whole.
I'm really looking forward to seeing more of that next year for sure. And you're right, I didn't really pay attention to that divide that you were talking about, but I have been seeing a lot more from MEPRA and from other organizations in terms of breaking that divide and giving more focus to PR communication professionals from the Arabic side. It is the Middle East, so of course Arabic is important. It should would be at the forefront for sure.
That's exactly right. And I was just going to mention that it's now more than ever that we need to put our focus and our resources and our commitment towards bridging that gap. Because, as you say, we're Middle East, and it is now, especially with the boom of the communication industry and our neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, within the Gulf and further still, we have to take the experience and the knowledge that we've learned over 20 years at MEPRA and utilize it to welcome our brothers and sisters in the Arabic communications field and agencies, again, with the same mission, because what was being faced within the English communications industry at the start, and the lack of understanding, as we mentioned, there's still very much of that in the Arabic communications industry. And so we don't have to start from scratch. We have 20 years of experience with MEPRA and with other agencies that have been working to improve the communications industry. And it's just a matter of joining hands at the moment.
Absolutely. And as you've mentioned, you have been part of MEPRA for most of its 20-year history. So you've been part of the growth and the changes that we've seen in the PR community in the region. But personally, what have you learned so far from your time heading MEPRA?
If I was to choose one main learning in this year from MEPRA, it's just the absolute willingness of all communication professions, Arabic or English communications, in contributing their effort and their time to improve the industry. There is an actual need, an actual hunger for people to offer their help and their services. In the communications industry, as much as I've been involved, it's being at MEPRA and being on the ground and being involved in so many different initiatives, be it from organizations or universities or individuals in itself. The passion that everyone has towards improving this industry is amazing. And while I always knew it was there, I never knew it was up to this level. And that's what makes me even more passionate about combining our experiences and efforts. And that's the lesson that I'm taking forward and trying to communicate, is that everyone is out there willing to help. We just have to find platforms for people to communicate, to connect, and to share resources and knowledge. And MEPRA is the one to do that.
It is a fantastic community. Our whole team benefits so much from being part of the community, there's no doubt. And as you say, there's a lot more that we can take forward with this. One thing I've really been enjoying is the UAE cultural awareness workshops that you've been presenting through MEPRA. I really enjoyed the session you did on Emirati history, culture, and tradition. And I definitely learned a lot from the session. I thought I knew a lot, but there was still a lot to learn. Could you give our audience a bit of background on why and how you started these workshops?
It comes back to that conversation that we talked about, being in the newspaper, seeing that physical divide between Arabic communicators and English communicators. And we launched the Emirates Today newspaper, and I was fighting with my colleagues to get the front page, which I'm very proud to say I got the front page. But it was all topics, and the reason why I was able to do so and able to be a contributing journalist was because I had the open mind of considering, both sides of the coin. And so taking the best of the expatriate community and the Emirati community. But then, like I said, there was few to none who were doing so. And it was simply because nobody had started that conversation. And so that's where I witnessed it at first, but it was only when I moved into the field of corporate communications. I started off at Majid Al Futtaim Group. I witnessed this in all companies, and I continue to witness it today in many companies. I saw how the work environment, how the quality of work that was being submitted, and just how the overall lack of understanding between the Emirati community and the EWEC community was causing numerous cultural clashes that I was just watching. I was just witnessing on a daily basis. It was exhausting. Of course, I would attempt to, diplomatically come in and try to offer my help. But usually by the time these clashes happen, it's in heated moments and feelings are hurt. It's very hard for a third party to interject and try to assist the matter. And so I approached my CEO, very forward thinker. I had asked him for some money. Give me some money to go find someone, a professional in cultural communications. I require a budget so I can bring them on board to speak to all of our staff. In my mind, it was an expatriate because there were no UAE nationals at the time that were offering that kind of service or having companies that were focused on that. So I was looking at maybe a professional in just the general global cultural communication field. And so I put it together. I don't know if we had power. I'm sure we had PowerPoint. It can't be that old. But we put it together in a presentation, and I shared it with a few people, first on the executive level, and it was a great hit, and we saw immediate changes. It started to increase to departments, and then I was placed on a roadshow. The company at the time had over 14,000 employees, and I was just on a roadshow, just going from organization to organization under the same umbrella and presenting this course. And we saw huge changes. I started to presenting it to other companies as well when being invited as the word got out. As I mentioned, as a columnist, a lot of my writings, or what I would present, I would write. What I would write, I would present as a perfect relationship. And it continued on. I even offered it digitally at one point where I recorded sessions or training online to assist people to understand the culture.
What an excellent idea and forward-thinking thing to do, because as you say, education goes a long way to preempt issues and conflicts before they even arise. Excellent.
Taryam, I want to touch on something that you just mentioned about how back then when this kind of situation or problem arose and then you went to your CEO and you said that there weren't any Emirati locals that were within that field. So obviously fast forwarding to now, are you seeing an increase in Emiratis pursuing a communications field? And what do you think was the inspiration for that, or what were the changes that allowed that to happen?
The fact of the matter, and I mentioned it in the course, is that, we live in a country where we're very fortunate enough that, I guess, fortunate and unfortunate at the same time, where you can live as an expatriate for 20, 30 years and not have to really interact or learn about the culture. Everything's in English. There's so many different types of communities. You can choose and pick who you want to be with, and you can remain in those communities for a long time. And there are friends of mine who, after sitting with me, and I mentioned that in the courses, that after talking to me, they said in 20 years, that was the first time they had a real heart-to-heart conversation with the UAE national. And this is, again, based on statistics as well, right? So, with the UAE's population, I think it's 9 million, or it was recently 9 million. And UAE nationals are 2 million, if that. I think it was less, but last time I was working on these statistics. Even if there were every one of us as Emiratis took it upon themselves to offer this course and to train people, it still wouldn't be enough. That is a factor that continues today. And I do see companies, there are a few who have taken upon themselves to educate people upon the culture, but not just the culture, the language. The Emirati Arabic language was a different classification than Arabic language in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco. And they're focusing very much on teaching not only expats from Far East, Indian subcontinent, or the West, but also Arab expatriates as well. I've seen some courses being offered in other smaller size companies and agencies, which cover sort of top level issues, which is great in itself. It just, even that shows that people recognize that to live within the UAE, you can live a fuller life, a life where you are accepted as part of the community by taking that and the initiative, by, breaking out of your comfort zone and pushing fear aside and trying to learn from what the culture, the traditions, the customs. UAE nationals, I do not know any UAE national who wouldn't be more than proud to share these cultures, customs, and traditions with anyone who's willing to ask.
I really feel that that is so true. As someone, I think I've mentioned in the past that I've lived my whole life. I was born and raised here in the UAE. So for me, I've seen it myself throughout my own life that I haven't had the pleasure to get close to a lot of UAE nationals, but the few that I have, they are always, as you said, very easy to talk to and more than happy to indulge us into the culture. And there is no kind of judgment. There's this understanding that there are things that expats don't know about it, and it's the patience of kind of explaining. And it's very nice. And I think that's kind of the whole idea of UAE has always been like that. And it's always been very open arms. And I think that's what attracts so many expats to come here. But as you rightfully said,
it's a sense of welcome.
Yeah.
That welcoming feeling. Yeah.
There is definitely that small divide between expats and the Emiratis in terms of getting more intertwined and having a mutual understanding of the culture. I definitely look forward to see that increasing as well.
This all stems from Sheikh Zayed, the founding father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. He made it very clear to everyone, including his Emirati population, that the only way to move forward is together with open arms, welcoming everyone across the world. And there was a need for it. It was a moral thing, but it was also a requirement as well. And the UAE, the success of UAE now being at the forefront of so many industries is based on that respect that the Emiratis offer. And this includes willingness for people to be part of the culture rather than simply just take on board or try to understand, but actually to practice and to become one of the community, one of the culture. I believe there's willingness on both sides. It's simply just a matter of just starting that conversation. And that's what we mentioned before, offering platforms or instigating and starting these conversations so people can join in.
Absolutely. And I actually also wanted to mention that I think what it could be, perhaps not for everyone, but maybe a lot of foreigners don't know a lot about the culture. So then they just have this perception of being maybe a bit hesitant or maybe afraid to say the wrong thing or approach it in the wrong way. So maybe they choose not to approach it altogether because of these factors. I feel it's such a misconception because, as I said, all the experiences that I've had, the UAE nationals they're so willing to talk about it and they're so patient, and that someone needs to take the step, as you said. So these types of platforms definitely help.
Absolutely. Fear plays a big role. And this is not just in the UAE, this is globally. It's called part of cultural communication. Fear is the factor that limits us and that keeps us in our safe, secure communities and boundaries and safe areas where we know we cannot get hurt or we cannot be embarrassed. It all ties back into fear, a fear of being embarrassed in front of others, fear of being
disrespectful.
Yes, absolutely. It's fear of saying it in the wrong way or doing the wrong thing, disrespecting, upsetting people. It's easier for me to stick to what I know. My wife and our favorite destination is to go to Japan. We take the kids there with us and we spend a few weeks at a time. And we don't stay in the cities. We go to the rural areas. We travel around. It's the only place I always remind my wife, it's the only country we visit where our kids have never asked us to go home after the first, let's say, 7 days, where they will be there the entire time and extremely upset about going home. And that's because all of us, myself and my children, we do our best to adapt to the culture, and we must look ridiculous doing it, but we enjoy it thoroughly, and people enjoy it too, and people respect it and understand that it's coming from a good place, it's coming from a place of respect, it's coming from a place of love. And I think that's what people need to consider when they're here. No matter how wrong you say that phrase or how you may, be doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, it's very clear that if you're trying, the intention is there. The intention is that you want to be part of this community that you live in, and that you're not just spending you're here for a layover to continue on to somewhere else. And even if you are, for anyone who does that type of traveling and working, I'm sure they will all agree that the most valuable thing you'll pick up is the experiences you have with people of the country, with the cultures and the traditions and the customs that you're living in.
That is so true. And it's also the funniest thing, speaking to many expats who came to the UAE, to Dubai, thinking it'll be for 3 or 4 or 5 years and never going back because they absolutely fall in love with the country. We can take it even further with these cultural awareness workshops. They can really feel like they're integrating with a community that will take it even to the next level.
Absolutely. And I know so many people who are like that, who indeed intended 2 years, 3 years max and spent the rest of their life here. I have some people here who are currently who've made that decision after spending only a year here. And that's because those are the people that right from the start, they said, right, teach me about the culture. And this is the other thing I mentioned in the culture course before, is that because of the low percentage of UAE nationals within the country, it's really upon our brothers and sisters in the expatriate communities to reach out themselves and to have the courage to ask the questions. Why do you do this? Or why do I see this? Even if you face a cultural clash, to ask instead of feeling bad and taking it away and stuffing that negative experience deep within you, but to ask, what did I do wrong and how can I do it better the next time?
That's great advice, yes.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I could go on and on about this topic because I feel that there's so many things that I've picked up from my own experiences and things that I would love to ask you more about. But I feel like we should...
Your listeners can tune into the next cultural course. We don't want to just take over.
Yes,
go ahead.
Exactly. We want to leave something for the next course. Okay, so Taryam, can you please share some of the feedback and experiences that you've had in presenting these workshops and sessions? And have you seen any changes since?
Well, the same feedback continues from day one. So if I say I presented it for the first time in 2006, I think I said, how long is that? 15 years later? Yeah, 15 years later. That same raw questions are presented after most every course. And when I say raw, I mean these are the questions that one is afraid to ask and look stupid. And there's no stupid question, of course. But again, as we mentioned, there's sensitivities towards it. You don't want to ask and see and insult someone, or you don't want to ask and be embarrassed or whatnot. And so people use this opportunity to really ask questions about simple matters that they were either curious about or sometimes offended about. I go into depth in the course about teaching many things, but I do enjoy answering those simple questions because it's a start, because I understand these basic facts, now I can move on. In the beginning, I don't even know why Emiratis do such or they do such, so people don't even invest time or effort in trying to learn any more than that. They're feeling like a complete outsider. So understanding those very basic parts of the culture encourages people to research more and to ask more, to reach out more. If I would say what has changed, the nationalities of people who attend these courses has changed. Predominantly, when I first began, it was European, Caucasian, Westerns that would be attending to learn. And now I have people that are from every part of the world. And one thing that's changed too, it's usually either a majority of people who would attend would be newcomers, but I have people now who are attending who have lived here a long time and identified along their path that there is a lack of understanding, but also that they're missing out. They feel that they're missing out on the opportunity, as we said, to live a much richer life and to be more part of the community and sort of to pick up that knowledge when they move on to say that I lived in the UAE. This is what I learned. And this is who the people of the UAE are, right? And this is in our favor as well. Everyone who leaves this country is an ambassador for this country. And we want to make sure that these cultural clashes that happen unnecessarily are not what people are taking away, but rather positive, joyful experiences, enriching experiences that they can share when they move on.
Taryam, could you share one tip with our expat audience if they are going to be doing business in the UAE?
Yes, I would suggest that anyone coming to the UAE comes in with an open mind about the topics that we discuss, because visually, when you enter the UAE, it's very easy for you to take on board that it's you and them, that there is a difference between you and the Emirati community or colleagues or businesses that you meet. And it's much more of a business exchange from two different parts of the world because we wear different clothes, the language is different. And so it's very easy to fall into that trap of saying, okay, clearly these people are completely different than me. They have different beliefs, customs, traditions, and I should not pay any time, or it's not even worth paying any time trying to learn about it. But I can focus on a general global protocols and follow them and hope for the best. And you can function on that. If you go down that road, you can function. I suggest to anyone coming in that there's so much more to accomplish and to achieve. If you look at the UAE community, culture and customs, that's very similar to your own, because it is. And all cultures and customs are similar to each other, regardless of the differences. We all want the same thing. We are all good people. We all want the best for each other. We all want to end our day on a positive note. Along the way, even during business, we want to make those connections. We want to make those intimate connections with people we meet, because as humans, this is rewarding to us. And we go ahead, our days improved, our lives are improved once we make that connection. It is almost impossible to make those connections if you're coming into that meeting or that project or that experience feeling that there's a huge divide between both. And not that it's bad or it's good, but just even putting into your mind that there is a separation between the Emirati culture and community and yourself will limit you along the way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's very valuable insight that you've shared with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of insights that you've been dropping throughout our conversation that I'm sure a lot of people will listen closely to and definitely appreciate. But let's talk about your future plans. So you did mention that there's something coming next year with MEPRA, if I'm not mistaken. But what other future goals or plans do you have, Taryam?
Well, if I'm looking further down the line, I mean, I'm currently, with everything that's on my plate at the moment, my work at EWEC is an Emirates Water Electricity Company. Previously used to be Abu Dhabi Water Electricity Authority and then moved on. So we are part of an initiative that is improving the efficiency within the energy sector. So it's a very exciting project. And communications is playing a huge role in terms of educating the public, brand recognition, as well as being a leader in initiating collaboration between other entities within the energy sector. So it's a very exciting project as well. We're only 2 years into it. And so we've got a long way to go, which is very exciting. And then at MEPRA, even though it's a year and change left with my being chair at MEPRA, there's so much we have to do. And so that's my future for there. My future for MEPRA is to make sure that we succeed in those major goals, actually in all goals that we started off with. And we've reached a lot of them already. And it hasn't even been the end of my first year. So I'm delighted at the work with the MEPRA team who have been working continuously to ensure that we are reaching our targets. But a little further down the road, I also come from a long line of educators. Well, I have continued to have a lot of family who are teaching at the university level. My father, in the end of his career, well, it was almost like 20 years. He was a university professor of communications at various universities. I do hope to, once I have, inshallah, when I have that PhD in my hand, I hope further down the line, I do hope to end my career teaching at a university level.
Oh, wow. You've certainly got some exciting plans and involved with some exciting projects. That's fantastic.
Really looking forward to seeing everything that's coming into play. But we've actually come to the end of our questions, but not the end of our podcast. So thank you for answering all the questions that we had prepared for you. It was definitely very enlightening, and I feel like I want to ask you a million other things, but we don't want to dwell too much on all the things.
We'll save that for another podcast.
Yes, let's save that for another time. So now we've come to the segment of our show where we will each ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. Are you ready to play?
I am indeed.
Okay, Taryam, if you could have dinner with any person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Gandhi.
Oh, excellent. Can you name one thing on your bucket list?
Skydiving.
I think that's for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's on my bucket list too. Okay, so do you prefer the beach or the desert?
Desert and the mountains.
Oh, nice. What is one thing you do every day, no matter how busy you are?
Meditate.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Thank you so much for playing along.
Oh, great. That's it.
Now, before we wrap up, we would like to do our green pill moment. If you took the green pill and could go back in time and change one thing about your journey, what would it be?
I started writing poetry at a very young age. In fact, I don't know who's going to be listening, and apologies to those if I'm letting their secret out, but I used to write poems also for my friends to give to their close friends.
Beautiful.
I had written a lot on anything, like pieces of paper, Post-its or whatever. And if I could change anything, now knowing about my great-great-great-grandfather's role in being the royal poet and writer, I would have liked to have kept some of the writing from then, just to see what I was thinking at the time and just how I was feeling. I guess if I read the poems, I could really understand what I was feeling inside, as poetry, as you know, is the best expression of someone's inner feelings.
Lovely. Yeah, that would have been something to keep. I know some people are very good about keeping a journal or a diary of what happens every day. I'm not one of those people, but as you say, to have that and to be able to look back one day would be lovely.
I do have a friend of mine who kept a few of the poems. It was a fun time to sit together and read through them. It was good fun.
Yeah, it would be lovely to go back and track them down, right? And see who still has them, who can find you the copies and put together as much as you can to hand down to your children.
Also to claim ownership too and let them know that I'm the one who wrote them and not those other guys.
Well, thank you so much, Taryam, for sharing your very interesting and inspiring story. And as I said, all the insights that you've shared, I'm sure that the audience is going to enjoy this as much as Hilmarie and I have. And just before we say goodbye, is there anywhere that our listeners could possibly follow you?
I'm available on social media, but most of my activities with MEPRA, if you're looking to, especially about the cultural course we were talking about, I'd like to invite everyone to join our next cultural course. I'm trying to find a way to offer it in a more public way. But yeah, I'm out there and easy to get in contact with anyone's interested in learning more about the culture or or just for a general chat.
Yes, and we'll also add your social media handles in the show notes so that people can find you and follow you.
Sounds good.
Thank you again for joining us today, Taryam. It was excellent. It was an inspiring conversation. I absolutely loved it. We wish you all the very best and look forward to the next time we have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very fortunate to be part of this podcast. I wish you guys the best of luck. And always, for the team there, please, reach out to me anytime. Good luck and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.